The NFL draft is right around the corner. It's time to give a final update on the rookie rankings. This time around, we are doing wide receivers. This is my final update. So without further ado, let's get started. Tier 1, wide receiver 1 for me is Teteroa McMillan. And yes, he is in a tier of his own for me in this class. There's just not that wide receiver that has that kind of upside that Teteroa McMillan brings. And I've gone back and forth on this. I really have, because there are some, and it's hard to even say this without sounding kind of like a dick, without sounding like you don't know what you're talking about. But when you watch the film, and I pointed it out on my YouTube channel, if you want to go see the Teteroa McMillan breakdown, it's live there right now. There are some plays that he takes off. There are some questions about his effort. And then that video surfaced, which some people dismissed altogether. I think it's going to be a concern for some teams. We'll see how high he gets taken in the NFL draft. There are some rumors that Matthew Golden is going to get taken as the wide receiver 1. I would not be doing that. Teteroa McMillan would be my choice if all the receivers were on the board and I was taking a receiver, obviously, by the fact that I have him ranked here. But you just don't get the upside that you get with any other player at the wide receiver position that you get with Teteroa McMillan. 6'4", 219 pounds, 22 years old. You know, he's been compared to Drake London, and for good reason. The past 2 seasons, 1,402 receiving yards in 2023, 10 receiving touchdowns. Then this past season, 1,319 receiving yards, over a 30% target share, and 8 touchdowns. He hasn't played a college season where he had less than 8 receiving touchdowns. So again, we're talking really good production, elite traits, especially his hands and his ability to run routes in the short to intermediate game. I do think his deep route running needs some work, but again, you don't get a perfect prospect hardly ever in the NFL draft. Let's move to tier 2. And tier 2 has 4 players in it. The first of which is my wide receiver 2, and that would be Emeka Egbuka. And Emeka Egbuka is, I used to describe him as like hitting a double. You know, there are some other wide receivers out there with more upside, and I don't know if that's true, because when you look at the profile, 6'1", 202, roughly a 4.50 40-yard dash. I honestly can't remember if he ran at the combine or not. I don't think he did. But this past season at Ohio State, again, at Ohio State where it was completely crowded, 1,011 receiving yards, 24% target share, 10 receiving touchdowns, and the film matches up with the college production. The film, he's a really good route runner. They moved him all over the field, and like I said, I think he's just one of the more polished wide receiver prospects, and he has a lot more upside than you think. I have him over some of these other wide receivers. The next wide receiver is Travis Hunter, and I'll say this right off the jump. Travis Hunter, if he were a wide receiver only, he would be my wide receiver 1 in this class. That's how good I think Travis Hunter is. 6 feet tall, 188 pounds, good college production, and what he can do on film is unlike any other wide receiver in this class. So again, I reiterate, if he were a wide receiver, if they said whichever team drafts him, he's playing 100% wide receiver, we're not going to mess with defense, he would be my wide receiver 1, and I've said that basically since November. Luther Burden is my wide receiver 4, and he's in tier 2. If it weren't for a lackluster season in 2024, I mean, the Missouri Tigers overall had a down year. Burden has the size. He has the speed and the burst that we're looking for. Now, he did play a lot of slot at Missouri. And again, the college production was down this year from 2023. But overall, there's a lot to like, and there's a ton of upside with Luther Burden. He falls just out of my top 3 just because of the quality of wide receiver that I believe is at the top of the board this year. So we'll move down to the last wide receiver in this tier, Matthew Golden. I like a lot of what I saw on tape from Matthew Golden. I just kind of wish I saw more of it, because when you look at his production at Texas, you know, this year, 987 yards receiving in 16 games. The previous 2 years, the production wasn't quite there, and a lot of his production came late. And I'm not, like I said, I like the film and I like the player, but this notion that he's going to be the first wide receiver off the board, I just don't buy it. Maybe I'm missing something. He's my wide receiver 5, and that's no disrespect to Matthew Golden. I like his game. I just wish I would have seen more of it, and maybe he will prove to be the wide receiver 1 in this class and prove me wrong. I just don't see it. I think he's a top 5 wide receiver. I don't think he's the wide receiver 1 overall in this class. Let's move to tier 3. And let's talk about a wide receiver that I find is somehow underrated, and that's Trey Harris. Trey Harris at 6'2", 205 pounds. He's going to be fast enough. The size adjusted burst score is really good. The college production over the past 3 seasons, really good. 900 yards, 1,000 yards, 10, 8, and 7 touchdowns. So I know people have a bad taste in their mouth because of Jonathan Mingo a couple years ago being drafted fairly high. And Trey Harris, seems to be a similar player, although he's not a similar player to Jonathan Mingo. I think Trey Harris is a lot better, and they utilized him in a more diverse way than they utilized Jonathan Mingo a few years ago over there at Ole Miss. Now, there is some risk in this, but you look at the yards per reception number of Trey Harris. I mean, this is a legitimate deep threat, a big-bodied wide receiver that can make an impact at the next level. I think Trey Harris in another class, just because I think the top of this class is really good, that's the only reason why I have Trey Harris as my wide receiver 6. Now it's going to get interesting. 2 wide receivers from Iowa State. I'll start with Jalen Knoll as my wide receiver 7. Jalen Knoll kind of reminds me, and this is going to sound bad, but he kind of reminds me of this year's Roman Wilson. You look at the profile for Jalen Knoll, and it's startlingly good. 5'10", 194 pounds, 4.38 40-yard dash at the NFL Combine, elite burst, good production at Iowa State the past couple years, especially this past year, got better and better and better every single year, and is a polished route runner in my opinion. So Jalen Knoll is my wide receiver 7. Then Jaden Higgins is up next as my wide receiver 8. Jaden Higgins kind of reminds me of Michael Pittman a little bit. I think he, it just kind of depends on what an NFL team is looking for. If you're looking for more of a slot wide receiver, Jalen Knoll might be your guy. If you're looking for an outside, bigger, more physical wide receiver that can win routes, Jaden Higgins is the answer. Now we're going to pivot to another wide receiver that I think is really good, and that's Alec Ayumanor. Alec Ayumanor has been my guy for a long time, and ever since I saw the game in 2023 where he played against Colorado and basically torched Travis Hunter, I've been a huge Alec Ayumanor fan. And you look at the college production in 2023, over 1,000 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns. This past year with terrible quarterback play, 831 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns. You look at the profile, 6'2", 206, 4.44 40-yard dash, just solid across the board. Now, he does have some things to clean up, especially from a route running perspective. But overall, there's a lot to like with Alec Ayumanor, and there's just a ton of upside for us in fantasy football, and I think NFL teams are going to be enamored with them too, especially with the size and the speed that he possesses. Now let's move down to tier 4. I have Jack Besh as my wide receiver 11 in this class. Jack Besh has done nothing but impress. He was the MVP of the Senior Bowl. At 6'1", 214 pounds, he has good size. He made the transition from playing at LSU, playing as a tight end, and then he transferred to TCU. And then this past year really was his only season of elite production. But in 2021 at LSU, he did have 489 receiving yards. This past year in 2024, just over 1,000 receiving yards, 1,034, 9 touchdowns. So, and this is a guy that I think has to win in a lot of different ways in order to get open. I think he's a good route runner, and I just think he's an overall just a good football player. Not too flashy, but you don't have to be effective at the NFL level. Now let's move to Jalen Royals. Jalen Royals is my wide receiver 12. And you talk about upside. Jalen Royals, just go look at his game log when you get a chance if you haven't looked at it. The size is good. The profile is good. 4.42 speed at 6 feet tall, 205 pounds. The college production would have been a lot better this year if he wouldn't have gotten hurt. He will be recovering from an injury that he sustained this year, but I can tell you that Spencer Petras, the quarterback for Utah State, was no good at Iowa, and he's not a very good player, but Jalen Royals was making him look really good. 834 receiving yards this year, 6 total touchdowns in 9 total games on 55 receptions. Very solid production. The next wide receiver we'll talk about is, and I get it, some of you are not going to like this, but Xavier Restrepo. I understand he is somewhere still out in the ether running his 40. Ha ha ha. We've all heard the jokes. But the tape doesn't quite match up with that for me, and especially not the college production. I mean, the past 2 seasons, over 1,000 receiving yards, over 1,100 receiving yards this past year, 11 receiving touchdowns. He looks a heck of a lot faster, and I think he's a pretty good route runner as well. And I think he deserves to be the wide receiver 13 class, and a wide receiver class that doesn't necessarily have a ton of depth. There's a lot of interesting names, but once you get outside the top 10, it's kind of like pick your favorite flavor of ice cream. At least that's my opinion. And Restrepo is still a guy that I think should be ranked inside the top 15. Felton I have at 13. Restrepo I have at 12. So sorry if I mixed that up. Ty Felton, wide receiver 13 here for me, and it's quite simple. I think what he was able to do in the Big Ten this past year was very impressive. 1,124 receiving yards, 96 receptions, 9 touchdowns, subpar quarterback play. I think he's got really good size, 6'1", 183 pounds, ran a 4.37, great burst, good route runner. I like Ty Felton quite a bit. Now let's move to Isaiah Bond, and Isaiah Bond is a polarizing guy because, you know, he has some legal troubles here, and he maintains his innocence. Now, if you aren't aware, he's accused of sexual assault. I don't know if there have been any developments in this case, but Isaiah Bond is a little bit undersized, 5'11", 180 pounds, but he has good speed, and I think he's a decent route runner. I don't think he's as good as his predecessor at Texas, Xavier Worthy, but I think he's probably going to be a 4th, maybe a 3rd round pick in the NFL draft, and I think he's an interesting prospect with a lot of upside, so I have him here as my wide receiver 14. Moving down to wide receiver 15, I have Torrey Horton from Colorado State. Torrey Horton's an interesting player in the sense that he was very productive earlier on in college. This past year, he got hurt, so that affected his production. But you look at 2023, you look at 2022, Torrey Horton was very impressive, and you look at the profile as well, also very impressive. My worry is that Colorado State did have him running a lot of shorter routes, but you can't deny the production. In 2022, 1,131 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns. Very similar in 2023, 1,136 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns, 4.41 speed at 6'3", 196 pounds. Again, really like him as a prospect. Let's move down to Savion Williams. I mean, Savion Williams is an absolute beast. He just is. And whatever NFL team gets him, they're going to have a plan for him because he's not necessarily a conventional player. 6'4", 222 pounds, run with 4.48 speed. This past year, 60 receptions, 611 yards, 6 touchdowns. You can line him up in the backfield. You can line him up as a wide receiver. He's the ultimate wild card player. Now we're moving on to my wide receiver 17, and that would be Kyle Williams from Washington State. This is a guy that's risen up a lot of people's board. A lot of people are going to have him a lot higher than I do, and I understand why. There's a lot to like. 5'11", 190 pounds, fits the mold of an undersized, new age wide receiver, 4.4 speed. This past year, 1,198 receiving yards, 14 touchdowns, had a good year in 2023 as well. There's a lot to like, and you could argue that I should maybe have him higher, but the tape for me the tape, just with some of these other guys like Kyle Williams, it's very, very close. And like I said, by the this could very well be a ranking that comes back to bite me. But for right now, I have Kyle Williams as my wide receiver 17. Let's go to Elijah Badger as my wide receiver 18. And this is a very impressive guy. You just look at what Elijah Badger was able to do at Arizona State: 866 receiving yards, 7 receiving touchdowns. And then, he was used as more of a short to intermediate wide receiver there. The size is a big green flag, 6'1", 200 pounds. And this past year, the receptions were down, but the yards per reception were way up. He was used more as a deep threat in 2024, 39 receptions, 806 yards, 4 touchdowns. And he was good at both being, a run after the catch guy, and he was good at being a deep threat. So I think he can be utilized in a lot of different ways at the NFL level. Let's move to our tier 6. We have just a couple more wide receivers to talk about. Tej Johnson he's moved down quite a bit for me. There was a time when Tej Johnson was inside my top 15. Now I have him at wide receiver 19. He's undersized and he's slow. 4.51 speed is not going to get it done at that size. The reason he is as high as he is because of his production. He's been consistent throughout his career, both at Troy and at Oregon, especially in 2023, where he had 1,182 receiving yards, 10 touchdowns, back-to-back seasons with 10 receiving touchdowns against premier competition. That's hard to ignore. But I will say we are depending a lot on the route running because the measurables are not very good with Tej Johnson. And the last player we'll talk about is Ricky White from UNLV. Ricky White, when you turn on the tape, very, very impressive player, at least in my opinion. 6'1", 184 pounds, 4'5", 4.49 speed. The past 2 years at UNLV, very, very impressive production. 1,481 receiving yards in 2023, 8 touchdowns, just over 1,000 receiving yards this past year, 11 touchdowns. So again, a little bit undersized. He doesn't quite get up there to 200 pounds, 184 pounds. But overall, the profile, the production, the tape, Ricky White might be one of these guys that I might have a little bit too low. So again, thank you for watching. This has been my top 20 wide receiver rankings and tiers for the rookies. Let me know what you think in the comments. And until next time, be good, everybody, and we will see you later.